continuing today with History of the Churches. I have enough slides prepared to start and finish this particular person. The chances of that happening is very slim, but we'll see how far we get today. And that person, his name is Lee Roberson. Lee Roberson. Now, we've been looking at the subject of fundamental Baptists, Southern fundamental Baptist churches in modern times, and we're not looking at all different types of denominations and churches in modern times. That would certainly be beneficial in some ways, but we're really focusing on churches that were Baptist, churches that were considered fundamental, looking at the history of fundamentalism as the movement was called, and then Southern fundamental Baptists. These were not ones that were just confined to the South, but they were major figures, key figures that were in the South but had a widespread influence. And then that helps us, this is really meant to help us see where a lot of the independent Baptist churches have gotten to where they are today, because many independent Baptist churches have been influenced by one of these people or another. Not all of them, but many of them in some way, shape, or form. And so it's had a very, very profound impact. And it's very important to look at the blessings, or look at the good influence that there has been, but then also look at some of the downfalls, the pitfalls of mistakes that were made, or things that were not right in some of these ministries, churches, colleges. And it's very helpful for us to look at that, so then we can take what was good and be encouraged by, learn from the good, and then also learn from the bad, and try not to repeat the same mistakes that were repeated. And it helps us understand where things are today, how things got to where they are today, when we look back at these influential churches and individuals and groups and ministries. And Lee Roberson, very, very influential. And let me just say, this in particular, many of these, I personally have ministry associations, at least friends in the ministry, that are part of, that may have come from Lee Roberson's ministry, come from other types of ministries. So when we are being honest about some of the downfalls, the pitfalls of this, it's not to say that, it's not to say you disown people who, you went to Lee Roberson, you did this, or you were part of this. These, as far as even with the weaknesses, as far as doctrine, as far as separation from the world, as far as a lot of the things that we would say, that we would have as most important in a church, these would be people who are closest to us in like faith and practice. And so, like I said, there's a wide variety among independent Baptists, fundamental Baptists. So it's not to say, there's maybe some similarities that are more like more to others than some. And but as for what I'm saying is, the people who I associate with, the pastors who I associate with, come from a lot of the same sphere of influence. So this isn't saying, so I want to keep that in perspective. As we look at weaknesses, we also have to remember a lot of these churches are ones that are, or in this case was, but many of the churches by people from these colleges and ministries are still solid churches who are trying to do the right thing. They're teaching the right things, taking the right stands. And so I want to make that clear, that this is not, that some of these are, they're people in our group, so to speak. But as far as a movement, I don't like to try to just identify, we're just one big fundamental Baptist movement, because there's such a wide variety in that, and I don't necessarily need to identify with some sort of movement. The most important thing is biblical churches. And churches the way that God wants them to be, individual churches. But back at that time, the movement was a very big thing. It was, how big could the ministry get? Let's have a big, wide move of God across the land, and let's keep building things up. Let's keep building up the numbers. And what we'll see, that's where the weaknesses came in, because many of these people were incredibly sincere, and they loved the Lord, and they wanted to see people saved. But there were certain blind spots, and of course all of us have blind spots at times, certain blind spots that were very consequential for the long term, and even in the short term at that point in time. And so we're looking at Lee Robertson, because he was one of the most influential figures. And in the second half of the 1900s, he was pastor of Highland Park Baptist Church in Chattanooga, Tennessee from 1942 until 1983. And after his retirement in 1983, he preached in around 2,000 churches until his death in 2007. So he preached a lot. He was very well loved, very well respected, and was someone who had a lasting impact on a lot of people's lives. And in many ways, there was a lot of good influence that he had, and we see both the good and the bad. And he founded Southwide Baptist Fellowship in 1956, and so we've talked about the different fellowships and the groups, churches associated with different fellowships. And this fellowship had 3,000 members at its peak in the 1980s. It was not a separatist organization even from its inception, and it became full-blown contemporary in the 2000s. Now, what interested me, though, was a few years ago, I found that there seemed to be, if you want to say, a resurrection of the Southwide Baptist Fellowship, where it took more of a turn back to the independent fundamental Baptist churches. And so it is now called Southwide Independent Baptist Fellowship. So it apparently became full-blown contemporary, but I don't know if it just dissolved or if some people said, hey, we're going to take the name and we're going to go back the other way. I'm not sure what the circumstances were, but they do have an annual fellowship meeting, conference, that is more associated with who you'd consider, for the most part, people we would have more relation with, or similarities with, and a lot of them from the South, called Southwide. So at some point it became more fundamental, back more toward its fundamental roots. I think David Gibbs Jr. from the Christian Law Association had something to do with that as well. He's tied in with that, and then some other pastors. I'm not 100% sure, but definitely more in the South. It's called Southwide, which would be why. But it's certainly focused on the South. And so they have a pretty broad scope of fellowship among independent Baptists as far as who they have to preach to them. So it is wide, it's Southwide. And I don't say that in a bad way, I'm just saying that in a factual way as far as, well, who do they most align with? Is it this person? It's a pretty wide scope among independent Baptists. And so that is in existence today, apparently in a more fundamental, back to more of a fundamental persuasion. He helped found Baptist International Missions in 1960, which is the largest fundamental Baptist missionary sending agency. As a matter of fact, the Buckinghams are sent through BIMI, it's Baptist International Missions Incorporated. And so he was very, very, and we'll see this a little bit later, maybe today, very heavy on mission boards. BIMI has pastors on the board, so they're a little more parachurch for my liking, let's put it that way. But there are some good missionaries sent through them that are certainly worth supporting, and certainly the preference goes to if the Lord provides missionaries that are not sent through mission boards, that's even the best thing, personally. But they would claim, now I've heard them say that BIMI, they would claim that they are a local church mission board in the sense that they have pastors on the board, and so they're a pastor-led mission agency. So they do operate fairly independently, and but at the same time, as far as being a fundamental Baptist missionary sending agency, they are the largest one, and they are in large part doctrinally sound. And the biggest difference is and I take this based on what individual missionary is contacting me, because I get contacted from time to time, and some of them are sent through BIMI. And so I look at their individual doctrine. I'm not going by what BIMI says they believe. I'm going by what the missionary and their sending church believe. And so that's still the focus, regardless of whether they're sent through BIMI or not. The biggest thing I look for is I want to know, what is their stand on music, because you can have a wide variety of different directions of music. Are they starting to adapt? Are some of them starting to adapt to contemporary? Or I think a lot of them stay pretty conservative in their music. And then the other thing is, what do they believe about the church, doctrine of the church, and the ordinances? And that is something that might vary a little bit through BIMI, where my biggest hesitation would be many of the ones that are sent through that they don't have. For example, the Carneys sent through GIBM, Global Independent Baptist Missions. That is also considered a mission agency, but at the same time, it is less, if you want to say, less top-heavy than BIMI, less organizational heavy. It's more local church centered. But BIMI still believes in the sending church, and the sending church has authority, but at the same time, so BIMI is a much larger developed organization. But someone like the Carneys going through GIBM, as far as the doctrine of the church and the ordinances, definitely be more in agreement with that than some of the ones that might go through BIMI. So it's a matter of that, exercising the right judgment on finding who stands where. And I will say, I've heard one other pastor say, and he's got a very this particular pastor, very, very strict criteria of what he's looking for in a missionary, and I can't necessarily disagree with where he stands. But he said he's having a hard time finding them. You can find the ones that are generally just overall fundamental, but if you're looking at some specific doctrines, particularly about the church and the ordinances, being very strong on baptism, Baptist church, closed communion, it's much harder. You're much harder to find, but that is what I try to look for in a missionary, and use, certainly try to use the best judgment that we can in who we support. So thankful for all of the missionaries. Think about the BIMI has had a huge impact for worldwide missions over the decades. Many hundreds and hundreds of missionaries have been sent through BIMI. And certainly many people saved, many churches started as a result of their work there, and also know very well they have a ministry called Reseeding America, which is what focuses on church planning, and they just are trying to come along new churches, helping new churches get started, supporting churches. They also try to help with finding if churches need a pastor, and there are various ways that they're trying to work. And so, once again, we have close connections. Actually, Elizabeth went to Camp Bimmy years ago, and that was, I guess, a good experience for you. Very, very, very good. I don't know. But anyway, they called it Camp Bimmy, which is for people being trained to be trained for the mission field, and so a lot of good, as far as the way the organization is structured, very good organization as far as they strive for excellence and do things very well. But not Pat Robertson, Lee Robertson. It's not Robertson, it's Robertson, Lee Robertson. He helped found Baptist International Missions, which once again still going strong today as the largest fundamental Baptist missionary sending agency. And so once again, I'm thankful for the many people saved and churches started through their influence. Robertson mentored or influenced pastors of the largest churches of his time, such as Curtis Hudson, Shelton Smith, Tom Malone, Jerry Falwell, Clarence Sexton, and Paul Chappell. They have, those are some, among independent Baptist ranks, those are some pretty large names. And Lee Robertson had a very, very large influence on them, or even directly mentored them. And he was married. He was saved at age 14 in a Baptist church. Was married in 1937. He was married to Caroline for 68 years. He led the church out of the SBC. So it was around that same time that he was being kicked out. He led them out and was being kicked out. But as Ecclesiastes says, the end of a thing is better than the beginning, because when you go full circle and you see how Highland Park ended, ended up coming full circle. Yes?
Was he kicked out in the process of leaving others out, or did he get out first himself?
I think it was probably a technicality. He was leading them out and they were kicking him out. No, you can't leave, you're fired, But it's amazing the criteria that what it takes to get kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention. They're more likely to kick out the conservative ones that are going against the grain of supporting their own missionaries, or it's all about the money, that type of thing. Then some of these, the Southern Baptist Convention today, a lot of the churches that are affiliated with them, you'd think, my goodness, they should have kicked those out a long time ago. To think about the fact that Rick Warren's church was Southern Baptist affiliate. Now, they might have left. I don't remember for sure. But what's the guy's name in North Carolina? Stephen Furtick. Their church is Southern Baptist affiliated. That guy, they should be. But, and by the way, the Southern Baptist Convention shouldn't even exist. It's not a scriptural entity anyway, and it's a big power-hungry, money-hungry structure, top-down, very politicized, so that the whole thing shouldn't even be around. It's not anything remotely scriptural. But by the way, I was before I started working full-time, which prevented me from attending some local pastors' meetings. I would attend from time to time, and one of the times we were, I don't know how I think I might have mentioned something about Faith Church at one time. I think had joined the Southern Baptist Convention. I don't think they are anymore. They are, they're still listed, but the Southern Baptist Convention, SBC, is not good at removing churches that are, so I'm not sure, but they are affiliated with the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, at least last I knew, which was a liberal break-off from the SBC back in I think the early 90s. So you want to talk about the liberal of the liberal when it comes to Baptist. And but I mentioned something about Southern Baptist and independent. I said, and I don't consider Southern Baptist to be independent churches. And little did I know, there was a guy there at that meeting who was Southern Baptist, and he said, well, I do, and I'm so-and-so, and I'm Southern Baptist, and I do consider Southern Baptist to be independent church. I'm like, okay, excuse me. But when you're sending mission money to the organization and not supporting your own missioners, I'm sorry, you're not independent. It's not, you're not. Are they running your day-to-day operations? No, but you're not a truly independent Baptist church. Anyway, he led the church out of the Southern Baptist Convention. This is why we're not getting through this whole thing today. I keep getting off on things here. Highland Park was a strong force in the promotion of world evangelism. In the 1970s, the average Sunday school attendance was 4,500. The congregation was giving half of its income to church planting and world missions. They supported about 500 missionaries. So, you're talking about at the height, they were a missions powerhouse as far as reaching the world, and those are incredible numbers when you talk about for one church of supporting that many missionaries and what was going on there, giving half the income to church planting. The church emphasized an infallible Bible, personal salvation, separated Christian living, fulfillment of the Great Commission, and the imminent return of Christ. Robertson was a man of good character. He was not a self-promoter. He had a quiet humility. He was a man of integrity and didn't have a hint of moral or financial scandal. He said that even if he saw his secretary walking in a driving rainstorm, he would not have stopped to pick her up because he didn't want to be picking up his secretary alone in the car. Tennessee Temple graduates have not been known for moral scandals, and there's always exceptions to that. But it is true that, and I will say, many of the moral scandals among independent Baptists, a lot of the ones that I've heard of, have been ones that have come from the Jack Hyles orbit. And there is something to be said about the influence of a ministry, even though Jack Hyles and Lee Robertson, some of the emphasis, such as on, which we'll see, quick prayerism, and some of the same things like big church growth and all that were the same. As far as personal character, there were some different things that we see between the Hyles world and Lee Robertson. He lived frugally and didn't take a large salary. He was a serious and sober-minded man as well as a hard-working man. He is known for saying everything rises and falls on leadership. He led by example, simplicity, repetition, delegating, enforcing rules, protecting the church, and being punctual. His simplicity, though, was sometimes too simple. And that was one of the downfalls of the church, was just a bit of a shallowness. And I mean, with all the what it sounds like all the good things about it, the shallowness is what would be its undoing later on in the years. So he would say 3 to thrive, such as 3 services a week to thrive. Just go to Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. Which nothing wrong with that, but basically you'd have these little catchy sayings that if you just attend 3 times a week, you'll thrive in the Christian life. Well, that's a little too simplistic. People should be at every service, but and it will cause you to thrive more. But some of the oversimplicity and some other things. 5 things. Here's 5 key things: faithful church attendance, Bible reading, prayer, witnessing, giving. All those are great. So a lot of those were things that were helpful for people. You could remember the way that he would put it. You could remember it, and so that was, but very, very simple. One time, some Tennessee Temple students started a private meeting to seek charismatic gifts. After one of the students preached a message sympathetic to the doctrine in chapel, Robertson got up and said, "We have a problem. I know who you are. I have the names on this piece of paper here. Now I want to ask everyone who is innocent to stand. If you're involved in this, don't you dare stand up. I know who you are. You keep your seat. I'll call your name. Now everyone look around. Those seated are not like us. They're doing something we're not for. I want you to mark them. If any of you are approached by them, I want you to come straight to me. They're on their way out. Now if you don't like it, you're out." And he was also known to cut off preachers if they preached too long in his mind. So he was so set on punctuality, so set on time, that I'm glad I wasn't preaching for him, I guess. But he would get up, and basically his idea was, and there's some truth to this, you get up and say what you need to say and you sit down, you're done. And there is something to be said for that, because sometimes you can just go on and on and on. It gets too long and unnecessary. But at the same time, that cuts off the leading of the Holy Spirit. If there's going to be a longer message, then certainly there needs to be a longer message. His preaching contained Bible truth and motivation to do right, but it was topical and limited in its biblical depth. So it's not a heavy on expository preaching. It was just a lot of motivational, here, do right, do right, do right, which all of that on the surface sounds really good, but that does not necessarily help with the spiritual depth of people being grounded in God's Word. Yes?
So would that go under the simplicity?
Yes.
Which contributed to the downfall?
Yes. Yeah, that would be.
I think so.
That would be that would go along with the simplicity. It's the focus on doing right and just live a good Christian life, but not necessarily equipping people to be solid Bible students themselves and having more biblical depth to them. There were some in that ministry that are. And by the way, there are many pastors who came out of the college there and the church there that do have good biblical depth and are very solid. So I'm not painting everybody with a broad brush. We're talking about the ministry as a whole, what took place in the ministry as a whole, and it's from when he was there till its downfall. So
I know that at least the testimony of the way that someone asked, how did Brother Robertson do counseling? And what was explained was that after an Sunday evening service, he would say, anyone that wants to come counsel with me, come down to the front row and I'll meet you there. And he would sit down and he'd take just one person at a time and they'd begin to tell him what was going on. And he'd go back to his 5 faithful church
Oh.
attendance, giving, read your Bible, pray, and I think soul winning.
Okay.
Those were the five.
Yeah.
And he'd listen for which one are you not doing. And then he'd tell them, there's your problem, you're not giving, start giving to the church, God bless you, you'll get better. And send them on their way. Next one, you're not soul winning, you need to get out there, meet us here, come soul winning, and everything, and we'll get better, and kind of send them on. And that's probably part of the simplicity it wasn't that it wasn't, what he said wasn't true, that they needed to do certain things, but it sounded like nobody was going to go to him and present some kind of life situation of I need some wisdom on what to do or anything. He's not going to address that specifically, because all he was looking for is which one of those five are you not doing, because if you do all five of those, then I'm sure you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
That was kind of the attitude overall, and probably very well meaning. But that's
Oh, absolutely, and that's the thing. The ones we're talking about here, they were all very well meaning, but it's a matter of looking back with an honest assessment of here's what happened, here's the good, here's the things that were lacking, and then it helps us to understand how things got to where they are, and then also how do we go forward? What can we take that was a good thing and encouragement, and then also avoid the pitfalls. The music was conservative and sacred. Contemporary Christian music was banned. Robertson had enough music training that when two college students tried something new in chapel one day, it was transitioning their song with a diminished chord or bringing in a seventh chord, Robertson got up in front of the student body and said, no, always finish out your chords. Don't leave it hanging, young men. So, I mean, that's a good approach, a good thing. Yeah, very, very. Most people aren't going to say, address that and say it in that way. He had enough knowledge of music, and that is the heart of contemporary Christian music that leaves you hanging, and then that's how they keep repeating the same things over and over. It leaves it's an unresolved feeling, which then it contributes to the emotionalism, the addiction of it, and getting hooked on it because it's not resolved. It's not you're done. It's not the way that the chords are, the way that the arrangement is. Unresolving chord progressions predominate in today's CCM, which creates a mystical, relativistic atmosphere. Tennessee Temple Bible Institute was founded in 1946 as the educational arm of Highland Park. It would later become Tennessee Temple University. The focus was entirely on the training of preachers, missionaries, and Christian workers. Originally, the school was a 2-year institute, but gradually expanded to 3 and 4 years. A seminary was added in 1953, of which John R. Rice was the vice president for the first decade. It was the largest fundamental Baptist college well into the 70s. By 2001, there were over 12,000 graduates. The first dean of Tennessee Temple was Herbert Lockyer. There was a great evangelistic and missionary emphasis. At the height of the powerful Highland Park missions conferences, there were 75 to 100 missionaries in attendance. That is amazing. That is amazing. Highland Park, now here's the thing about the mission boards. Highland Park only supported missionaries through mission boards. So now you have the opposite. Some churches, I found it's more likely that a church isn't going to support you, or some churches would say, if you're through a mission board, we're not going to support you, and that is the way that, I mean, we did not go through a mission board when we started this church, and that was by conviction that it was not for us to go through mission board. Believe in being sent out directly through the local church. And there are some churches that we came across that if you were part of a mission board, they weren't going to support you. But apparently Lee Robertson was the opposite, where unless you were through a mission board, we weren't going to support you. The Clouds, David Cloud, who wrote the book that this is based on, they were supported by Highland Park for 2 years, but were dropped as soon as they left the mission board to become independent. Many of the boards that they approved were New Evangelical. The separation of Highland Park and the SBC was largely due to Robertson's practice of supporting their own missionaries. That was one of the big dividing lines. Once again, it comes back to the money and comes back to, hey, you support the Southern Baptist missionaries. And so, but you want to talk about a powerful missions, evangelism emphasis, church planting emphasis. They really had that there. Unfortunately, Highland Park practiced quick prayerism, which puffed up the numbers, and we've talked about this regarding John R. Rice and Jack Hyles. This puffed up the numbers, and this was practiced by many graduates. A great number of professions and baptisms were through the bus ministry, and they were known for some over-the-top gimmicks for bus ministry, children's gimmicks, just a tremendous amount of that. They operated 45 bus routes that ran as far as 90 miles from Chattanooga. A joke in those days was, did you know that one of Highland Park's buses crashed into one of Jack Hyles' buses this week? Yeah, and the accident was in Kentucky. So the joke being that Hyles is running his buses so far and Robertson's running his buses so far that they overlapped in Kentucky. So Robertson actually required that there be someone to profess Christ and be baptized every service, which is that's gonna result in a lot of quick prayers. And speaking of the quick prayers, my wife said last week, reminded me of her college student friend who lived around that area, and many of the people, they were in the Chicago area, Jack Hyles area, and or Hammond, Indiana area, which they would go into Chicago, and many of the people were so familiar with the soul winners that a lot of them would just, tell them what they want to hear just to get them away from the door, because they were so zealous, so pushy, so much wanting people to go through the Romans road and have them pray, that a lot of people would just do the prayer or just tell them what they want to hear just to get rid of them. So yes.
It's just interesting to me that he picks up real quick on those two students with the cord hanging,
yeah,
however you want to put it.
Right.
And then allows this.
Right.
It
Yeah.
defeats the purpose.
Right. Right.
It doesn't seem consistent.
It's not. And
they're both dangerous.
yeah.
But this is much more so.
Yeah, as far as when you're talking about the gospel and people actually being saved, that definitely is dangerous. And yeah, that comes back to, we realize that if we're all honest with ourselves, and this is whether this is pastors or whether it's anybody, everybody has blind spots. Everybody has blind spots. Areas where they just don't see it, and sometimes somebody might even say something about it and they just don't want to hear it. And so we do have to be careful. Blind spots are a real thing for any of us that we be careful of, that we could have a lot right in a certain area, but then on the other hand, then missing it on other very important areas. So, and that's always my concern, my goal for myself is I endeavor at least to be as well-rounded of a person as possible and the Bible says to walk circumspectly. And if you walk circumspectly, you can hopefully try to eliminate those blind spots as much as possible. But that's a big one, where a person could have enough discernment and understanding about music to call that out, but then not think that there's really anything wrong with that. And it came back, the blindness, I think, came from the idea, let's just get things as big as possible. Let's just have this movement that's going across. And that is always a big blind spot when you're talking about getting bigger and better and going forward. And that can really blur the vision. We're going to stop there, and what we're going to do is I'm going to try to finish him next week. We're going to cover a little bit of Jack Hyles next week, and then we'll have one more after that, which those will be a bit more brief. So we might be able to finish the people and the ministries next week, maybe, and then after that, kind of probably a couple weeks or so of just some closing things, and then we're racing toward the end of this series here.